Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to PNP Live. I'm Brad Graham, the co-owner of Politics and Prose, along with my wife, Lissa Muscatine, and we're very excited to be hosting Eliza Reid, the First Lady of Iceland, here to talk about her new book, Secrets of the SPRAKKAR, Iceland's Extraordinary Women, and How They Are Changing the World. A couple of brief housekeeping notes first, though. To post a question at any point during the discussion, just click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen. And in the chat column, you'll find a link for purchasing copies of Secrets of the SPRAKKAR. Now, Eliza has been Iceland's First Lady for 5.5 years. And before that, she was a freelance writer for multiple Icelandic magazines and editor of Iceland Air's In-Flight magazine. She also co-founded the Iceland Writers Retreat, an annual event that combines workshops with cultural tours to introduce visitors to Iceland's literary heritage. Known as a vocal proponent and advocate for women's rights and gender parity, Eliza in Secrets of the SPRAKKAR looks at Iceland's success with gender equality. SPRAKKAR is an ancient Icelandic word meaning extraordinary or outstanding women, and Iceland, it turns out, has a reputation for being one of the best, if not the best, places to be a woman. It holds the top spot on the World Economic Forum's list of countries closest to achieving gender equality. How that happened and what we can learn from Iceland's experience are the questions Eliza addresses in her book. She personalizes her account by profiling a number of present-day Icelandic women and weaving their stories together with her own impressive one and with the history of other influential women of Iceland's past. Now, Eliza herself grew up on a farm in Canada near Ottawa and moved across the ocean to study history as a graduate student at Oxford University. There, she fell in love with a fellow history student, Gudni Johannesson of Iceland. The two got engaged and she followed him back to Iceland in 2003, learning Icelandic and eventually raising 4 children together. Eliza is clearly and understandably proud of her country, and she writes with warmth, wit, and insight. She'll be in conversation this afternoon with a great example of American SPRAKKAR, Carla Leonnig, an investigative reporter who's been with the Washington Post for more than 20 years. She won a Pulitzer several years ago for reporting about lapses in the Secret Service, and she was part of Washington Post teams that won 2 other Pulitzers for stories about secret U.S. surveillance efforts and Russian interference in the 2016 U.S. presidential election. She also appears regularly on NBC News and MSNBC as a contributor. In the past couple of years, she's come out with 3 great books, 2 on Trump's presidency, co-authored with her Post colleague Phil Ruckert, a very stable genius, and I Alone Can Fix It, and Zero Fail about the Secret Service. So Eliza and Carol, screen is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Brad. And thanks for letting me be the person that gets to interview Eliza Reid. I've been looking forward to this. It's not really my area of expertise, gender equality. But I have to say this book, Eliza, was such a treat to read. And like you, I was juggling like a maniac here in America, where it's not the best place to be a woman, perhaps. But I was reading it at a volleyball tournament and finding myself missing some of my daughter's important scores or hits while I was, engrossed in it. It was really enjoyable. Thank you for writing it. Thanks for letting me be your interviewer. I'm so glad you're here.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you to Brad and everybody at Politics and Prose for hosting this event. I was initially so disappointed that I wasn't able to make this trip in person, but, again, with Zoom, the wonderful thing is that people can tune in from all over. And I'm so thrilled, Carol, that you wanted to do this in conversation with me and that you enjoyed the book. And I'm really looking forward to our discussion.
Yeah. So I guess I have to also just give a shout out to our friend in common, Erica Green, who's the one who's been telling me about how amazing you are for several years. And now with this book, I totally see why. So lucky us. Oh, as you say in your book, let's get to the butter, I believe it is. Get to
on
the
with
butter.
the butter. On with the butter.
On to butter. We're going to make the butter. Let's get to the crux of the matter. You I think a lot of people are going to want to know in this audience a lot about you. And so I'm going to start with a nice old softball. Tell me about your feelings and your road to being sort of an accidental first lady. I suppose accidental first ladies is how all of them begin. Tell me about your road to that role and your feelings about embracing it and eventually mastering it.
Well, mastering is very generous. Everything is a road, but thank you. Yes, as Brad said as well, you know, the road started on a hobby farm just outside of Ottawa, the capital of Canada, where I barely knew that Iceland existed growing up, much less that I would one day be married to its head of state. If we fast forward to when I went to graduate school, which was at Oxford University in the UK, which is of course a very international institution, and Canadians there were a dime a dozen, as were Americans and Germans and Brits, but Iceland was pretty exotic. And my now husband, Gudni Johannesson, was the only Icelander who was studying at that college, and I think one of only a maximum a handful of Icelanders at the entire university. And, you know, so he was very intriguing, I think, to everybody, maybe particularly to me. And it meant that, you know, I formed my entire stereotypes about a nation based exclusively on what his personality was like. So he was very bookish and you know, did lots of reading, collected lots of books. And so I thought all Icelanders were like that. And in fact, Icelanders do love books. And he as far as the university students go, he didn't drink very much. So I thought that Icelanders really hardly ever had anything to drink, which is slightly less accurate, I would say, if I'm going to be stereotyping. But in any case, we met at Oxford. We fell in love. There's a couple of anecdotes there that I don't need to go into now that are in the book. And in 2003, after he completed his PhD and I'd been working in the UK, we moved to Iceland to set up a life here in the country. And it was very important for me, even though I moved to the country because of him, for love, as it were. I wanted to stay because of me. I wanted to build up my own raison d'etre in the country. So I was very fortunate to get a job quickly. I started learning the Icelandic language. I made some friends. We bought a tiny little 1,000-square-foot yellow house near the water. We had 4 children in just under 6 years. We were working, my husband was a lecturer at the university, and I was cobbling together lots of freelance writing projects, and it was great. And then finally we thought this tiny house was maybe a little too small for our 6-person family. And so we moved a 10-minute walk away to a bigger house. And you know what moving is like. We just said, we're never going to move again. This is it, we're settled. And then during my husband kind of rose to national prominence during the Panama Papers scandal when he was a pundit called to talk about how it was affecting Iceland. And there was an ongoing presidential election, and people realized that he knew a lot about the presidency and the history of the presidency. And I should add here that the president of Iceland is not a political position like it is in the US. So we have a prime minister here who is a member of a political party, who is the head of government, and the president is outside of that, has a veto power on laws, and is the head of state, but is more of an overarching symbol of unity. Anyway, he won the presidency, and I remember the election was at the end of June 2016, just to give you an indication of the time. And I was in Chicago at the end of March, so 3 months before, talking about Icelandic literature for a promotional event with the tourism board. And I was out for dinner with some Icelanders, and we were all talking about the presidential election and who we thought would run and who we thought might win. And I had no idea that it was going to be my husband. And that was right. 3 months before. So that's how quick everything happened. And you asked me about my feelings. And I guess, I mean, it was just such an emotional roller coaster. Our mutual friend, Erica, will tell you that as well, because she was visiting me for some of that time. It was very, very busy and exciting, and just an emotional roller coaster. Sometimes you're just so touched and thrilled, and other times you're angry and upset and stressed. And our children, there were 2, 4, 6, and 8. So we were kind of trying to balance all of them. So everything happened very quickly, but I feel so incredibly fortunate to have had this opportunity to serve. And And I'm really trying to make the most of it in many ways, because it's such a special opportunity. It's such an honor to be able to serve in this capacity. And I've had so many adventures, and hopefully that will continue.
Well, let me be rude and cut you off there, because I did ask
Yeah.
you too much of a goat choking question, your road and how you feel. Let's go back to a minute in that path, which I was really taken aback by. And it's when you are in your first job in Iceland, and you did, it seemed to me, have this magical experience of finding a good job, a rewarding one, a satisfying one, in a new country that you had just adopted. You meet and witness a CEO who's breastfeeding during a board meeting, and her fellow board.
She was the
Forgive
chair of
me,
the board. Yeah.
she's the chair, and her fellow board member eventually takes the child and toddles it on his knees while she's making another part of the presentation. Tell me a little bit about that experience and what it said to you in the moment rather than retrospectively.
Well, it's interesting because that moment happened in the fall of 2003, so almost 20 years ago. And it was a very brief moment. I certainly wasn't sitting in that board meeting, but it still sticks in my mind. And I think because, I was in my 20s, I had moved to this new country. I had moved with a partner, but we weren't thinking at all about having children anytime soon. It wasn't, all of the things to do with childbirth weren't on my radar at all. But it was a very masculine company, it was software, and there was very few women working for the company. I didn't at all feel like it was a misogynistic environment. And that moment sticks in my head so much, where, not only was it a woman there was a woman CEO, and this woman who was who was the chair of the board. And she was just nursing her baby while she's talking about, and then, somebody else holds the baby and nobody said a thing. And she wasn't trying to cover herself with a blanket and hide everything and apologize for what she was doing. And there was nobody who kind of looked away and was trying to hide themselves while she was talking. And it was just completely normal and natural. And that's still stuck in my mind, even though, it was just a brief moment, but it was something I remembered, and something I remembered thinking, this is a good place. If it, it should be this way. And I'm glad that it is here.
Did you know when you moved to Iceland that gender equality and this way of focusing on not women's rights, but just men and women being equal, did you know that this was Iceland's badge of honor?
No, I wouldn't say that I did. I guess I knew the Nordic countries' reputations overall as countries that were quite progressive, in many facets of society, including gender equality. So I knew that there was maybe less of the sort of misogynistic or boy culture, or whatever you want to call it, in the Nordic countries. But I didn't know that Iceland, I guess they didn't have this World Economic Forum list then, but I didn't know that Iceland, was going to be top of the list. And one of the things that we talk about a lot here is the fact that we had the world's first democratically elected female head of state, female president. I definitely didn't know that before I knew Gudni, and I don't remember when I heard about it, but it's something that is talked about a lot here in Iceland, understandably, because an entire generation of people grew up having a female head of state, having a female, run the show. And that, I think that having that role model was very important as well. But I think I gradually got to learn about it all through just living my life here and building my life here. As I had children, I learned about how that process was. And as they started preschool, I learned about that process. And when I started my own company, I learned about that process. So it sort of came organically to me as I was working.
One thing that's so interesting about your book is exactly that, your own personal experiences woven into, and then we found out that childcare was a perfectly lovely subsidized childcare was available down the street. And when I had my, third newborn, I was able to, have some of my kids being minded in somewhere else and really focus on this newborn baby. What's your feeling about the piece of Iceland's sort of family infrastructure, as you refer to it, that's was the most valuable or the most important to you?
Well, growing up in Canada as well, I had always expected, for instance, to have good parental leave policies. And to be honest, I think growing up, I hadn't thought about the men's parental leave and how valuable that was to them. But they, fathers take a lot of parental leave in Iceland as well. I think what I really valued, and I wouldn't say it surprised me, but I hadn't thought about before, was not only is the daycare subsidized, but the municipalities, to differing degrees, subsidize siblings as well. So not only is it very affordable to send one child to daycare, but it's even more affordable to send more. So for our municipality at the time when our children were there, the second child was 75% off the already discounted fee, and the third and fourth were actually free. We just paid for their food. And these are also these are institutions that are of a very high quality. They're managed by the government, and they're checked and everything. So it's not anybody can just open up a place to watch children or anything like that. So I knew that they were well taken care of when they were there as well.
And you talk a little bit about, and I'd like to hear more, I know the readers would too, about how this parental leave and inequality shaped or was interwoven perhaps in your own relationship with your husband, Goodney. The way he would take care of the children for the day might be different than the way you might take care of them for the day. But please tell us a little, and tell our listeners a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think it especially struck me the fact that when say a father takes his paternity leave, and the system works in Iceland, use it or lose it, which means that each parent is allocated a certain amount of leave. And so one parent can't take all of it. And so, especially because I was working from home. So even though when I'd return to work, I'd return to my home office. So I don't know if that was good for my husband or not, because I was always kind of over his shoulder. But it builds such a strong bond from a young age with the children. And I do, but as you said, everybody does things differently. And I do recount one particular moment where he was taking our son out, he said, for the day, and he was going to go to the archives because he's a historian, and he was going to peek at the archives, and he was going to go to one of these, mommy and me or daddy and me classes and go for a walk. And anyway, it was a plan for the whole day. And he had nothing with him except the baby, and a stroller. Nothing.
And a banana.
He bought the banana on the way. He didn't even have that. And that's what he said. And he had no diaper bag and nothing. And I was really trying to resist the urge to criticize, and he has a daughter from his first marriage. So I thought he is an even more experienced parent than I am. I really don't have, but I had to say, don't bring anything. And he said, I'm going to buy a banana at the store when I'm there. And that's all we need. Two guys conquering the world. And guess what? That was all they needed as well. I kind of hoped that something would go wrong, but obviously nothing did. But, we all have different parenting styles. And I think that shows you that's healthy for the kids to experience, both parenting styles.
It's a perfect segue to, Eliza, to something you describe really well. And that is, here's this amazing statistic about Iceland, listeners, which is it has one of the highest percentages of women who are working outside the home. And apparently guilt-free, because it's a very high number. Here in America, there's just constant, chest pounding guilt about your choices. If you are staying late at work at your career, if you choose to go back to your career when your children are very, very little. What are the conversations you have with your female friends about any guilt, any of that sense of stepping away from that traditional nurturing role?
Well, I mean, I definitely feel no guilt, because I think I'd much better do my professional work than I would be doing all the home things that you're supposed to be doing. But I think if anything here, it's kind of the pendulum has almost shifted so much the other way that if there is societal judgment, it's at maybe a mother who would choose to stay at home with their children, because that is so rare that if say a mother says, I'm going to wait, I'm going to be at home with my kids until they start primary school, people would say, oh, why would you do that? If there's and really, I mean, what we're trying to do with all of this is put the structures and systems in place so that families can choose what is best for themselves. So I think if a family chooses that they can afford to and they want to keep their children at home, and I think that I'm right about this, although I may not be, I think with the child, the subsidization that goes into the childminders, I think if you don't put your children in that, you can get that subsidy back from the community. So it's kind of evening out as well. But I think that, that if anything, yeah, there's judgment still for people who choose to keep their children at home because they would think, isn't it good for your children to be in preschool and to be interacting with other kids? Because of course there's no activities offered for kids during the day after they're about 18 months old because they're all in preschool. So it's kind of shifted the other way. And I think there's a sense of people saying, the society is investing a lot in women's education. Women are a huge majority of people at university, for instance, and that's very heavily subsidized. And, society isn't getting its investment back if those people don't then go into the workforce and contribute their ideas and pay their income taxes and all of this. So I never, out of my friends, everybody that was in my circle of friends was working. So there was never a debate of feeling guilty for not being home with the kids or not. And I think that's so important because, no one can have it all. We can't do it all. We can't achieve whatever this ridiculously unrealistic expectation that tends to be put on women is. But what we really can do is try to control all the time and energy that is complete waste, which is feeling guilty for not being able to do it all. We can't. So we just have to say, look, this is what's not going to be good here. I'm going to leave that aside and then focus my energies on the other thing, but not focus my energies on feeling guilty for the things that I can't manage. Like as I'm doing this, you see, I'm fiddling with my hair, which isn't very tidy because that's one of the things that I'm not very good at is hair. And dear viewers on Zoom, I apologize, but I'm also not going to feel terribly guilty about it because I have other skill sets. So it's okay.
Yes. And writing a book is one of many of them, I'm sure. On the guilt front, it strikes me that there's another reason not to feel as guilty because your options are so good and comfortable and safe. Meaning, if I had subsidized daycare 5 minutes from my home, I wouldn't feel guilty about the heart-stopping commute, which I had to take then, right? So the options are great. The guilt is lower. It's quality. You used a wonderful word, judgment, which I think is really a great entree to the next subject. One of your chapters is about Iceland, in the main, being very much stigma-free about sexuality. Tell our listeners a little bit about this fascinating example of it when some British and maybe other international national men's soccer club members were caught, one of them married, with dating some Icelandic beauties, as they were referred to. Tell us a little bit about the judgment about this moment in the UK press that you encountered.
Yeah, and that's also an example of how we talk about women in media too. That it was last year, it was during COVID, and the England national soccer team had a match in Iceland, and so they had to quarantine in their hotel before they could play the match, and they'd been in touch with some local women on Snapchat or something like that who had gone to see them in the hotel because the women didn't realize, or at least said they didn't realize, that they weren't supposed to receive any visitors. And anyway, somehow this got out that it was a violation of quarantine rules, obviously, and the football players were suspended for the next match, I believe. But the press in Britain was all about the Icelandic beauties who had gone, these girls who were women who had gone to the rooms and kind of putting the blame on, like, we were thinking, who was it that actually broke the quarantine rules in this dialogue? And in, I'm not saying that no one criticized them in the Icelandic press and that it was perfect, but people all, stood up to their defense and said, can we, please say that these women are allowed to do what they want to do. And it was perfectly consensual that they decided to go to the situation. But they were definitely, I think, treated a little bit differently in the British press.
Absolutely. And I'm going to ask you a question that's not fully addressed in your book, unless I missed it. Why do you think in the United States, this is so threatening. Stigma-free sexuality, accepting that there are going to be single women having children, that there are going to be women and women, homosexuals being in a loving partnership and raising a child. Why do you think that is still such a dramatic event here, and judged by at least a portion of our community, but not so in Iceland?
It's a little hard for me to answer that. It's probably why I don't answer in the book, because I don't, I've never lived in the US. I'm not an expert on American society. So any kind of conclusions that I would have would be purely based on people, things that I read, or I don't have an expert's opinion. My sense is that, again, just my instinct is just that religion plays a stronger role in American society, and some forms of religion are stricter when it comes to that. Now, I mean, in Iceland actually has a state religion, the Lutheran Church, and over 80% of the country officially belong to that religion. So, in some senses, there is no separation between church and state in Iceland, as there is, say, in the U.S. So, in many senses, Iceland is more officially affiliated with a religion. But as you say, I think it's almost 80% of firstborn children are born to unwed parents. It's more unusual for parents to be married before they have children. And Iceland is very tolerant to LGBTQI plus communities, the most tolerant of the OECD nations. Maybe that's also developed because we're a small society. So there's a non-binary trans activist who I interview in the book, and they were saying that too, that most people in Iceland know trans people just because they work with them and they're related to them and they've gone to school with them. And everything that we know is somehow less threatening. The more that we are exposed to diversity in all of its forms, I think the more accepting that we become of it. And certainly Iceland's size in that sense has been an advantage. And maybe, we see again, I couldn't comment on the US specifically, but, in Iceland, most people aren't married when they have children, for example, but children are fine. There's not some moral breakdown in society, and people, I think divorce rates aren't any worse or better than any other developed country. So, whatever the sort of next step concerns are of some of these situations, they don't seem to be manifesting themselves here. And people have a lot of children. They have the average age of first children is younger, but the abortion rate is also very high because it's quite easy to get abortion for people who wish to do so.
One thing you wrestle with I guess I should ask, Canada and Iceland, any other comparison? I didn't mean to force you into a US based question. Is there anything you want to say about Canada in relationship to your experience there?
I mean, I get asked a lot in Canada because I always say we have small nation complex. And I say that with Iceland because it's very small. And I say with Canada because Canada is a massive neighbor. So, I just I recognize it in myself from the country I grew up with and the country that I live in now. When it comes to policies, I think Canada is working more towards those policies, but just hasn't achieved as many so much. But there's less of a debate about whether or not those policies should exist.
Well, thank you. One of the things you wrestle with in your book, and a few places, I love, by the way, when people say, I'm really not sure of the answer, when I interview people, because I'm like, this is an honest broker.
Right.
He or she gave me a lot of really interesting information and doesn't want to pretend that they know more than they do. You say a couple of times, I'm not sure why this is the case in Iceland. You talk a little bit about, not just a lot about standout historic female figures going back to the 15th century. You talk about Denmark's king, I think it is, making a proclamation at some point that may have contributed to this. Let's talk about both pieces, your bigger theories or shots in the dark about why Iceland has this, and then about that Danish king when Denmark was still in control of Iceland.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I have in the book 5 little vignettes, I guess you could call them, in between chapters. So it's organized that the chapters are meant to sort of talk about different aspects of society through my own story and interviews with SPRAKKAR, with outstanding women. But these vignettes are kind of meant to show the history of Iceland, because I want, we do have so many strong female role models in history, and that has been important in the battle for gender equality here. But I thought it might be boring for the reader to start the book with like a history of Iceland. So these 5 stories are not the only, they're basically little stories about women in Icelandic history, and they're not the only stories, but they're meant to be examples from different time periods that I chose. And I think the one you're referring to is from Olaf the Rich, who was a woman in the 15th century who, with her husband, was incredibly rich and had amassed a lot of property. Some of it she had amassed in her own name, which was unusual. And her husband was killed, and she avenged his death by hiring a bunch of mercenaries who, if I remember, the people who killed her husband sent her husband's head to her in a burlap sack. And she had this phrase like, let's not mourn him, but avenge him. And she did. She took 20 years, and she had everybody killed who was responsible for that death. And
she's like the Mossad in the Olympics.
Right. Yes, exactly. And they had traveled. Now you see, I'm even forgetting the details. They had actually been captured by pirates, I think, at one point, and the king had agreed to ransom them in Denmark. And the king of Denmark was aware of this woman, at least in far outpost Iceland. And now you see, like, I've written this so long ago that I've forgotten the details.
No, you got more than I did.
Yeah, no. Now I want to remember exactly how it was. But she convinced him of something, and again, the story. Who knows how much of it is story versus truth now, right? That he was so impressed with her and her words that it either started or stopped the war with the British, because it was the British who had killed her husband.
And also, she was considered such a historical force that she said she wanted something important to happen in the years before her death, or the years after. And then this huge storm came, and they called it Olaf's Tempest. So that she had a power that went beyond sort of the storytelling. She had a mythical power. There's another character who's powerful, more modern day. Tell us a little bit about what I'd like to call the woman of Gullfoss, a woman who was leading on the issue of the environment in Iceland.
Yeah, and she's almost more known as Iceland's first environmentalist. She's not really known as a gender equality activist. And there were people, kind of around this time, she lived around the late 19th century, who were speaking up for women's rights. But she was a woman who lived near the farm where the famous Gullfoss waterfall is, which, for anybody who has visited Iceland, is one of the main tourist sites that people to go to. And there was discussions then that they wanted to harness that, dam it up to generate electricity. And she didn't want to do that. And so she made several trips to the capital, which at that time was much more complicated than it is nowadays, to protest the potential damming of this waterfall. And that story, again, has also been mythologized to a degree. So it was said that she walked barefoot across the lava fields, 200 kilometers to do this, which is pretty unlikely. And I think we know today that actually they probably stopped the plan to dam it because they decided it wasn't economically feasible, rather than through her protests. But what I was trying to express and say that too was that it's more the reputation that she has, because we see this, the legend surrounding her has become more important than maybe the facts of that story anyway, for the positive effect that it has had on how we believe women can have an important role and a voice.
Yeah. I feel like it might be important, because I have a million more questions for you, but I feel, Eliza, that I should be generous and ask a few from the massive group of people who've gathered for tonight's event, and listen to some of our viewers. They have questions as well. She said, do you feel, this is from Robert, do you feel
Yeah.
any resentment from Icelanders that their first lady was born in Canada and not Iceland, and who has a very obvious non-Icelandic name?
Mhm.
He's wondering if this would be difficult for
Mhm.
you or was along the
Mhm.
way.
I think that's an excellent question. The short answer is no. I'm the sixth first lady of Iceland, and I'm the third one of foreign origin. So I'm not particularly special in that respect either. The first lady was from Denmark, and the most recent first lady before me, Dorit Musayev, uh, was born in Israel, lived in London most of her life, is the second wife of the former president after his first wife died. And, she was first lady for well over 10 years and very popular here as well. So I didn't have to break any barriers to be serving here. And I had been living here for many years before that too. So I speak Icelandic. My children were born here. I've had Icelandic citizenship for many years, and so I've always had a very positive feeling about it. And I've really tried to use my role here and my platform as well to showcase immigrants in the country, because we've had a huge increase in immigration in the last 20 years to Iceland. We're a much more diverse country than people think. And that's an important, dimension of diversity too. So I speak Icelandic well, but I speak it with an accent and I make mistakes. And it's very important, I think, that people hear that people know that people who speak in the way that I speak have things to say beyond talking about immigrant issues, quote unquote. So I've always had a very positive experience. I don't go searching in the comment section for negative things, and probably my Icelandic vocabulary does not extend to all the horrible words anyway. But I have not at all felt any negative feedback for being from abroad. And I think people know that I'm from Canada, and they think that that's fine.
You again give me a perfect entree to another reader question. This is from Linda. She wants to know, is Iceland a very homogeneous society? Does that make a difference? And has that perhaps helped this gender equality rep and reality? And she has one more follow-up, which is, what is the attitude towards immigrants in the country?
There's a whole chapter on immigration in the book. So I won't go into too much detail, but I would say that it is a less homogeneous society than I think people think. Just over 15% of the population is born somewhere else. That's 10% in the US, if I'm not mistaken. Although, obviously many people in the US have roots in other countries, whereas that's less the case in Iceland. But there are more people of foreign origin living in Iceland than there are senior citizens living in Iceland. So it is much more diverse than I think people think. I think most people think that this is generally a good thing, but it's happened very quickly. And so it brings different challenges. A lot have to do with learning the Icelandic language that we need to address. And when I talk about it in the context of gender equality, my chapter on immigration speaks to three different women and kind of shows, again, we can't paint all immigrants with the same brush because we all have different backgrounds and experiences here. But there are absolutely challenges for immigrant women that there aren't for women who are born in Iceland. And that, the point of that chapter is to say that if we want to feel like we're working towards gender equality, we can't leave any groups behind. Gender equality isn't for one elite group, one specific privileged group of women within a community. It is for everybody. And when I say everybody, I don't mean just women either. So I think that that's something very important to keep in mind. And that's why I talk about it in that chapter.
So lucky me, I asked without looking some of the readers' questions. So I'm now going to get to go back to a few of mine. And listeners, please feel free to ask some more that I haven't asked already. I want to talk to you a minute about something you very, you could say it's snippy, you could say it was incredibly creative, that you're credited with, which is when asked some questions about the way you were going to be First Lady and what you were going to do, you said you were not your husband's handbag, in essence, arm candy in a new word. So pretty gutsy, Eliza. And what prompted that? Tell us.
That was a phrase I used in an op-ed for the New York Times in 2019. And it was sparked by an Instagram post that I think Donald Tusk posted it. It was of some of the spouses at the G7 meeting, I believe in the south of France. And it was about 4 or 5 of them gazing out to a sunset, I think. And the caption was the lighter side of the force. And it just reduced these women somehow to these sort of muses, policy muses for their husband's genius, or, just, both the image and the caption just said, these people are here to kind of make their husbands look better somehow. And it bothered me so much seeing it, both that that thinking that these women have their own, skill, that they're just their own people, if you know what I mean. And I thought, in the olden days, I would have posted this on Facebook with something snarky, and then I thought, it's too bad I'm not allowed to do that anymore because I'm first lady. And I was on a flight, I remember, when I saw this. And so it was like I had a few hours, and I remember thinking, wait a minute, nobody said, there's no handbook to being first lady. Why am I not allowed to post something about this? So I did post a Facebook post about it, which I worked on this flight. And then that got picked up so much that a friend of mine said, you should send this to New York Times. And I remember thinking, I'm not allowed to write for the New York Times. I'm a first lady. And then again, I thought, who told me I couldn't do that? Why am I? So I did. And there's 2 things that I remember from that I'll mention. One was that line that seems to be the takeaway line. I wrote, I'm not my husband's handbag to be grabbed as he runs out the door and displayed silently by his side at public appearances. And when I wrote the story, I had a couple of friends look at it before I submitted the final version. And all of my female friends said, oh, that's so funny. That's great. And all of my male friends who read it said, if you need to tighten up the piece or cut it, just take that out. I don't think it's really adding anything to the story. And it was kind of universally like that. And it's the line that people remember. And the second part about it was that the night before it was aired, I hadn't told anybody except my husband that I was writing it, nobody who works at the office or anything. And, just to say, and I remember thinking, why did I do this? This is ridiculous. People are just going to make fun of me and they're going to say that I shouldn't do it. And I'm putting myself out there for no reason at all. Nobody asked me to do this. And it's such wonderful feedback from it. So many women who were maybe better known as the spouse of somebody else and could relate to it. And it just reminded me to think that you should kind of lean into something, an uncomfortable feeling sometimes, even if we're not really sure why we're doing it.
Yeah, I'm going to take that to heart. I have to ask you a really superficial question. I watched, my great knowledge of Nordic societies and equality is based largely on watching Borgen. and now
I love Borgen. Okay.
So
we'll just take this for another discussion. I love it. Right. Okay.
My Borgen question for you is going to be, that was a really tense marital experience. The wife being the leader, the man being relegated to this role of, now you're going to stay home. We're going to take turns. Have you had painful Borgen moments? Of course, the situation's very different, right?
We don't tell people what happens in Borgen.
I won't.
I would say so I think the 2 good things with us are that we have such a good relationship and marriage and have had for a long time, because I think obviously being president is a very demanding job. And if you were in a partnership where you needed a lot of attention from each other, it would be very difficult to do that. And secondly, I guess there's 2 dynamics. One is that you're equal in the marriage, but you're kind of working together and you're not equal in that working relationship. So you have to kind of, and my husband hates it when I say this, because he would never be like, oh, my decision is the final decision, but I know that he kind of could in a work choice, because president kind of does trump not the president, right? It's fair enough. Yeah. And he would never, ever, ever do that. But that's kind of a strange dynamic. And I think the good way to solve that is to kind of have your working hours or not. So, we sort of say like, okay, now work is done. And even though we're still here at home, we don't need to say, are you going to that meeting tomorrow? And did we finish that speech? Like, you have to turn it off sometimes, because otherwise it's just mixing, work and home too much. So
what's something you've had to give up as being part of a unequal political marriage? there's no reason it should be, right? We understand. What's something you've had to give up?
In the marriage, you mean? Or in
No,
just
as a result of being first lady?
I mean, I want to say my anonymity would be the first jump, and yet of all places, Iceland is the place where it's not such a big deal, if you know what I mean. My laziness about clothing a little bit, I guess. I just be more, I mean, I guess my anonymity to a degree, like in Iceland. So Iceland is very easygoing and you can go places, but I kind of always have to assume that at some point I can be recognized. I would never go out for dinner with a bunch of girlfriends and drink a lot of wine, and I can't say that that's a huge sacrifice to, for all of the interesting adventures that it's been, and hopefully ways in which I've been able to serve. That's the only thing that comes to mind right away, though. I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I'll think, that's the other thing, but I can't remember what it is.
And how have you made this life workable, palatable, and I guess I should say easygoing for your children, 5 children?
My stepdaughter, who's now almost 28, she's always, she's been an adult since this has happened, and she's always been living on her own now with her boyfriend. So it's affected her less directly in that sense. I was just saying it to one of our kids this morning, actually, because for our youngest kids, it's been more than half their lives that their dad has been president. And then for the other kids, it's most been the time that they remember. And that was the thing that you think about the most, obviously. But again, in Iceland, I think of anywhere, they've had to have the fewest changes that maybe you would of anywhere else for being head of state. And we just, again, try to be around them a lot, as much as possible. And, again, here you have wonderful freedom. So their dad, takes them to sporting matches and competitions, or to the swimming pool, or to the movies when they want to do that. And so I think it's all very, I think they have pretty regular lives as much as possible. But there was a funny moment, if I have a moment for one, like very brief anecdote that's not in the book, but I have said once in interviews, which was the day after my husband was elected. So he was president-elect. We flew to Nice in France because Iceland was competing against England in the men's soccer European Championship tournament. And it was a huge game that Iceland actually beat England, which was a massive deal. And we had just happened to get tickets. Obviously, he wasn't president. He was just going in unofficial capacity. We were taking our oldest son, who was then 8. But of course, given protocol, the French authorities needed to know that we were traveling. And so we get into the plane, and they upgraded us to business class because he's just been elected president. And we were there with the then outgoing president and his wife. They were also sitting there. And our son, who kind of played, it had those flatbed seats. So he's like playing with the seat, the whole time, of course. And we land, and there's a motorcade for us, like next to the aircraft, because of protocol. And my son looks out the window and he turns to me and he says, "Do we have to pay for all of this?" And so it's like this balance to say, you can tell your friends, but you're not allowed to brag, and maybe this will happen again, but you shouldn't expect that it will always happen. And so it was a kind of, and you should have then seen the 3-star TripAdvisor hotel where we were staying when we pulled up with our motorcade. So yeah, it was all kind of different.
Now let's hit the Hampton Inn. That's what we're paying for today.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly. And the Holiday Inn was not used to the.
So I'm going to slip in one more of my questions, and then there's another reader question. You started this amazing thing, the Iceland Writers Retreat, which has been, hampered ever so slightly, like everything else has been, by COVID, complicated. But why does this make you so happy? What was it about it that you feel really proud of?
Well, I started it with the wonderful Erica Jacobs Green, our mutual friend. And one of the reasons it makes me so happy is because I get to work with her so much in it, and she's wonderful. I love that we have this event that we started completely from the beginning, and the event brings over anybody who likes to write, and they come to Iceland, they take writing workshops, and they go on literary tours. And so I love seeing this come to life, and it didn't exist before. It wasn't a project we took over. It wasn't something we switched. It wasn't there, and now it is there. And I love the stories that people tell when I love when they come and they say, you know, I've started to write again, and I never did this before. I stayed in touch with all of these people afterwards. And when people tell us later, you know, what's happened and the community that they've built, and when they write us to tell us the effect that it's had on them, that's a wonderful feeling to know that people have had this positive experience with us. It's really, I can't describe it.
Awesome. Okay. And then a final question from a viewer, which is, you know, Carol's Washington Post colleague, George Will, has a child with Down syndrome, but who is in his 50s and has lived a good life despite his disability. In recent comments, including at this bookstore, Politics and Prose, he has severely criticized Iceland for being proud of not abortions, but the easy access to them. And he says societies would be better with the science that can be gleaned and from the lives that can be had of children who are not aborted. So what are your thoughts about Will's criticism?
That's an interesting question. I think that, I mean, you know, you can't say Iceland, the country. I know that this has been in the news sometimes, because of the stories of the high percentage, I think, of babies who are diagnosed with Down syndrome, who parents choose to abort babies for whatever reasons, whether or not that they're diagnosed. But I think in Iceland, you know, we've done, my husband and I, it's an interesting question because my husband and I have done a lot of work with the Down Syndrome Association here. One of our very good friends has a child here with Down syndrome who's very active, again, to promote all you know, the wonderful work that they're doing and the wonderful people who are in the society there. But I think, you know, that I think what it comes down to is people, you know, giving parents to be their own choice. And you know, in Iceland, nobody would, you know, absolutely. I think it's important for people to say in a medical situation, to have all options available to them. And one hopes that medical professionals aren't steering people into one choice or another. But at the end of the day, those choices are the choices of, you know, the mother who is having a child. That's just the way that it is.
Eliza Reid, this has been such a treat. I could do this for another hour or so, and maybe we can do this on our street one day if you're back in town. Thank you for answering these questions so generously.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Great moderating, Carol. You always know just what questions to ask. And Eliza, what an engaging, instructive, and relevant book. You've enriched my own appreciation for Iceland as not only a country of breathtaking landscapes, but also as an international model for gender equality. And you've taught many of us a fun new word, SPRAKKAR.
Yes, I hope that this gets used a lot, SPRAKKAR, because if we think in English, there's no words in English that positively describe women, exclusively women. So this is
not in one word.
Exactly. That's only for women. Yeah.
To everyone watching, thanks for tuning in. A reminder that in the chat column, you can find a link for purchasing copies of Secrets of the SPRAKKAR. Just love saying that word. From all of us here at Politics and Prose, stay well,